Our continuing coverage of the 2025 Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis. Craig Grialou, Dani, Sureck, and Matt Miller, ESPN draft analyst, joining us right now. And let's just dive right into this draft class, because what you mentioned recently on Twitter was two positions of need that the Cardinals have that this draft class is loaded, and that would be edge and defensive tackle. What do you like about the depth specifically on those two positions?
Yeah, this is the deepest defensive line class I've ever evaluated. I think I have 30 players that play edge or defensive tackle in my top 120 right now. So there's a lot of top-end guys like Abdul Carter, Mason Graham. They're going to go really early in this draft, but there is that depth, and I think it's a testament to like so many players were developed. Like Walter Nolan to go from A&M to Ole Miss, and we see him take that next step. There's always a couple guys from Georgia, it feels like, and there's two this year who are really good with Michael Williams and Jalen Walker. But it's fantastic. And it's so funny how this lines up, because everyone was down on this draft class, and then the Eagles go and beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl with a great defensive line, and it's like, oh, wait, this draft is exactly meets what's really in vogue right now, which is running backs and the defensive line, and that's where this draft is strongest.
When you talk about the depth, defensive line, edge rushers, what do you see in that depth that maybe Cardinals could still get in a player day 2 or maybe even early day 3?
No, there will be starters that come out of rounds 3 and 4 in this class just because of that depth. And also, we're still seeing the guys who are coming off that COVID year where they got the extra eligibility. So it has made it such a deeper group where some of those guys would have been in last year's class and they would have been second or third round picks. But now we get this loaded group of prospects. So I do think you're in a great spot. If you wait until round 2, there's still going to be starter-level players. Or if you, like you said, if you want to even push it off to day 3, I think you can find players, like a name that comes to mind for me is Vernon Broughton from Texas. He was a one-year starter there because they were loaded at defensive tackle. In that 1 year, he just completely popped on tape, and you're like, oh, my gosh, this guy's such a good athlete. He has so much potential. He just only got to play for 1 year because they had such great defensive linemen ahead of him. So, that's a kind of a great analogy for this class as a whole. Is there's a lot of guys that just had to wait their turn, and then once they got that opportunity, they took that next step.
You brought up the Super Bowl, and it's something that we've referenced a lot. Based off what is going on, at least those playoff teams that were successful based off the line of scrimmage, do you find yourself evaluating now draft prospects maybe a little bit differently based off what is in vogue in the league? Does it trickle down to what you see in the college ranks?
Yeah, it does. And I think for what I do, it doesn't really change how you evaluate the individual players, but it definitely changes, like when we do mock drafts. It's like, okay, we're going to see a rush on defensive linemen probably because that is a copycat league, right? Everybody wants to win the line of scrimmage. So offensive linemen, defensive linemen, kind of expect them to go off the board a little bit earlier. And on the college side, it has been really fun watching, especially the teams in college football playoffs this year. Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, they dominated the line of scrimmage, both sides of the ball. And so I do think we see that in the college game right now too. Yes, we all love quarterbacks and Travis Hunter who, can do everything it seems like on a football field, but the great teams in college are dominating at the line of scrimmage.
Speaking of mock drafts, your mock draft earlier in February caused a little bit of a stir amongst Arizona Cardinals fans. Not just one cornerback, but two in the first 2 picks. I can understand why one, because if a player is so good, you can't pass up. But what about the cornerback position has you high, especially where the Cardinals are selecting?
Yeah, early February. I will throw that out there, right? It was right after the Senior Bowl. And it was more – Zydae Barron can play everywhere. He could play safety. He could play nickel. He can play outside corner, which is where he played this past year at Texas. And then Savone Revel in the second round is who I had. And that was just about value. It's like, okay, sometimes this value is good. So it was no disrespect to the Cardinals corners or saying hey, we got to completely scrap this. But, like a team like what Philly did last year with, you take Quinyon Mitchell in round 1 and then it's like, oh, wait, Cooper DeJean's still here. And he's such a versatile player, you almost feel like you can't pass on that value. So that was kind of the mindset at that point. When we do our team needs, I promise Cardinal fans, it's defensive tackle, it's defensive end, it's another wide receiver. So I promise, locked in on the team needs. The next mock draft won't have back-to-back corners, I promise.
What are some other positions besides defensive line and edge rushers that you like from this class?
Yeah, I love this running back class. I think we have a shot to have the record for most running backs drafted in a 7-round draft. 30 in 2017 was the record. I think we got a shot to break that. The tight end group is really good at the top. Now, there's not a ton of like late round depth in the tight end group, but there's 6 or 7 guys who are going to be starters in the NFL pretty early on, at least as a tight end too, early in their career. So those 2 positions really stand out. The more I get into like the safety class, I keep finding guys that I like, that you watch them in the fall and you kind of put them away, and then you come back after the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl. It's like, wait, man, I actually really like that guy. And so it's fun, almost like going back through your notes and remembering guys that you fell in love with during the fall, and now we get to see them work out this week.
Those 2 positions specifically, as far as running back and tight end with the Cardinals, you appeared to be set, but going back to the point about what the Eagles did at cornerback, is there a way that there's a running back or a tight end that is just too valuable to pass up, regardless of what you already have in the room?
I think that's where like your team building philosophy is really important, and to understand where you think your team's at in its process, right? If you are a team that's perennial playoff team, I think you can, say, hey, the value's too good, we just have to draft this player. As you're still building your roster, I think that's where it gets a little bit harder to make some of those luxury picks. But at the tight end position, we're seeing so many teams have success with 2 tight ends. And Trey McBride's awesome. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL. So I don't think you're saying, okay, we need somebody to take catches away from him or take targets away from him. But if you could find almost like an F tight end, someone who's a little bit more of an athlete that you're going to move around and almost just be like a big slot or a big wide receiver, then I think you could have that value. The running back position is always fascinating because you can have a guy and they can just fall off a cliff overnight, it feels like. So I think a running back is where you do want that depth. Injuries happen often. I'm excited to see what Trey Benson can become. I liked him a lot coming out last year. So it will be, with those 2 young guys at the positions, like you said, you seem to be set, but I would take a swing on a day 3 running back this year, and maybe like every other year I would probably do that, just because you need to keep churning the roster at that position.
Talk about Trey Benson, one of many rookies who had a lot of meaningful snaps for the Cardinals. You spent a lot of time looking through and evaluating and talking about a handful of those rookies this time last year, players like Marvin Harrison Jr., Darius Robinson, Max Melton.
Yep.
What did you see from them in their rookie year, and what a realistic progression for year 2 could be for players like that?
Right after the draft, I think I gave the Cardinals my highest draft grade, and I just remembered that. Like, I loved the draft class. When you run through it, it's like, gosh, I had first-round grades on that guy. I had like a top 50 on that one. So, such a good year. And I think, with what Marvin did year 1, there's a lot of progress, and it's just like finding the right way to get him involved in the offense so that he can have that breakout year, getting he and Kyler on the same page. I think for a lot of the rookie receivers, people expected, greatness right out of the gate. That doesn't always happen at wideout. Cardinals fans will remember, with Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Bolden, like, it takes time sometimes to have those big impacts. So Darius Robinson's another guy who he just needed developed. He was so raw. There's so much potential there. So I think, getting into year 2 with both of those, guys who I had as first-round picks and top 25 players, I still think the sky's the limit for what they can be. They just both needed a little bit of development. And I think for Marvin especially, all the tools are there. But at Ohio State, he was always the best player on the field. And it's a little bit easy sometimes to just dominate because you're so physically gifted. Now you're learning how to be, a professional wide receiver.
It was a 12-player draft class a year ago for the Cardinals. They've got half as many picks this year. Monty Ossenfort loves more bites at the apple. How many trades do you think overall, based off the depth at certain positions, that you might see a lot of movement, not just with the Cardinals, but across the league as far as teams trying to accumulate more maybe day 2, day 3 picks?
Yeah, so I think what's really fascinating this year is if the 3 of us were each general managers, our top 15 is going to look wildly different this year because there's not those blue chip players, where you say, okay, everybody kind of has those guys in the top 10 or top 15. That doesn't exist this year. So I do think we could see action because, you might have a player that you love and we're both kind of down on. So you're flying up the board to try to get this guy. So I do think we could see teams rushing to get their guys because there's not that consensus this year. The problem would be there is a drop-off. This isn't the deepest draft, especially at positions like wide receiver, corner. You're gonna have your board wiped out pretty early. So I don't know that we see teams necessarily like last year, which was such a deep draft. You wanted to load up on picks. Last year was a great year to have 12 picks. I think this is a better year to have more picks early. By the time we're in rounds 5, 6, 7, I think there is a pretty good drop-off this year.
Matt, always appreciate the time. Look forward to that next mock draft.
I'll make it up to you, Cardinal fans, I promise.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, guys.